Hey everyone, and welcome to the Deep Dive.
Always exciting to be here.
You know how this works, right? You give us the sources and we dive deep.
That's us, deep divers.
Exactly. And today we're going to be diving into the evolution of human emotions. We've got some fascinating articles about fear.
Oh yeah, fear's a biggie.
Some evolutionary psychology too.
Always love that.
A little bit of Wikipedia just for fun.
Gotta have that Wikipedia.
So get ready to uncover how these, I guess you could call them invisible forces, how they helped us survive.
Really shaped our social lives too.
Exactly. And we might even bust a few myths along the way about how our brains actually work.
Always up for some myth busting.
So before we go too far, can we maybe back up a sec? I think it'd be helpful to define, what emotions actually are.
Good point.
We use words like, feelings and emotions all the time.
All the time.
But do we really know what they mean, from a scientific perspective?
That's a great question because it gets pretty complicated. Scientists like to use this big umbrella term, affect. And that covers everything. Like from those little fleeting feelings to those full-blown emotional experiences, even moods, gut reactions, you name it.
Okay, so affect is the big picture.
Big picture, yeah.
But how do we break that down into smaller pieces?
Okay, well, think of feelings as that kind of raw sensation, like that knot in your stomach when you're nervous or that warmth that spreads through you when you're happy. It's your internal experience.
Right, those feelings that are so hard to describe with words, but everyone knows what you're talking about. But emotions are more than just those feelings.
Way more. Emotions they're what happens when those feelings get all mixed up with what's happening in your body and what your brain is doing at the same time.
Okay, so my heart's racing, my brain's trying to figure out what's going on.
Exactly. It's your body basically getting ready to react in a certain way.
So it's a whole mind-body connection. You're saying even those gut reactions, the ones we don't really think about, even those involve some kind of thought process.
Absolutely. Think about that universal ew reaction we all have. You find a bug in your food.
Oh, yeah, that's the worst.
Right. And it's not just a random feeling. It's a biological adaptation, a way to avoid things that could make us sick.
You're saying our ancestors who had that really strong disgust response.
They were less likely to eat something harmful.
And more likely to survive.
More likely to survive.
Wow, that's incredible. So even something as basic as disgust has this whole evolutionary backstory. But wait, doesn't that kind of contradict that old idea of the emotional brain? You know, the one that's separate from the rational brain?
You're thinking of that classic triune brain model.
Yeah. The reptilian brain, the limbic system, neocortex.
Each with its own little job.
Yeah, where all the emotions are happening down there in the limbic system while all the rational thoughts are up in the neocortex.
Well, luckily, science doesn't stand still.
That's good to know.
Right. And we know now that even animals with way simpler brains than ours, they have structures that handle both emotions and higher level thinking.
So it's not as compartmentalized as we used to think.
Not at all.
Our brains are much more integrated.
Way more integrated.
Okay, that's blowing my mind a little bit. Really challenges that old way of thinking. And speaking of challenges,
Oh, here we go.
I think it's time to bring in the heavy hitter, fear.
Ah, yes, fear.
Seems like fear is the emotion scientists love to study the most.
It's a popular one. There's a reason for that, though. It's not just a powerful emotion. It's also, fundamental for survival.
Across so many species.
Across so many species. I mean, it's what triggers those fight or flight responses that keep us safe from danger.
Right. So how do scientists actually study fear in the brain?
Well, that's a good question.
Do they just scare lab animals and watch what happens?
Well, it's a little more controlled than that.
Okay, good.
One common method is fear conditioning. So imagine you're pairing a specific sound with something unpleasant for the animal, like a mild electric shock. Over time, the animal learns that the sound means something bad is coming.
So they learn to associate that sound with danger. But what does that tell us about the brain?
By looking at the animal's brain activity during this process, scientists can pinpoint those brain circuits that are involved in fear.
So it's like tracing those electrical pathways, the ones that light up when that fear response is happening.
Exactly.
And what have they found? Is there a fear center in the brain?
Well, there's a star player.
A star player?
It's called the amygdala. It's this little almond-shaped structure. It might seem small, but it's a total powerhouse.
It's doing all that.
It's detecting threats, it's triggering defensive reactions, and it even helps us learn to avoid dangerous situations in the future.
Wow, it's incredible that such a tiny little part of the brain can have such a huge impact on keeping us alive.
It's amazing, right? And what's even cooler is that similar amygdala circuitry, well, it's found in a lot of mammals, not just humans.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so that tells us that fear and the whole brain mechanisms behind it, they're deeply rooted adaptations.
Billions of years in the making.
Honed by evolution.
It's like this ancient alarm system,
Yeah.
passed down through generations, keeping us safe from harm. But I'm guessing the amygdala isn't just about fear, right?
You got it.
I mean, we experience a whole range of emotions.
We do.
Not just fear all the time.
Well, while fear is what the amygdala is most famous for, it's actually involved in other emotional experiences too.
Really?
Think about how we process rewards. Like that feeling of satisfaction when you finally get a delicious meal after being hungry all day.
Oh, yeah.
The amygdala plays a part in that too.
So it's involved in the good stuff, too.
The good stuff too.
Not just the scary stuff.
It's even involved in aggression, maternal care.
That little amygdala.
Yeah, it's truly a multifaceted structure.
Sounds like it. So we've talked about how we share a lot of these emotional systems with other mammals.
Yeah.
But are there any emotions, maybe even brain regions, that are uniquely human?
Now that is a question that keeps scientists up at night.
That's a good question.
It's a big one. It's likely that some emotional systems, especially those tied to those really complex social interactions, they might have uniquely human components.
That makes sense. I mean, humans have these incredibly intricate social structures and ways of communicating that go way beyond what we see in other animals.
Absolutely.
But let's go back to this idea of emotions being so crucial for survival.
Okay.
How did emotions beyond just fear, how did those help our ancestors stay alive? In a world that was full of so much danger.
Well, think about the daily challenges they faced. Predators lurking in the shadows,
Yeah.
competition for food and resources,
Right.
and the need to navigate this constantly shifting social landscape. Emotions like anger, fear, disgust, they help them respond effectively to all those high-stakes situations.
So anger would fuel their fight response, giving them the energy to defend themselves or their resources.
Exactly.
Fear, of course, would have helped them escape those dangerous situations, and disgust would have kept them from eating things that could make them sick.
You got it.
Those split-second, emotion-driven decisions.
They could be the difference between life and death.
Wow. It's interesting, even Charles Darwin, way back in the 1800s, he was fascinated by how emotional expressions evolved.
Darwin, he was ahead of his time.
And he came up with these 3 principles to kind of explain it.
Oh, yeah.
Like Darwin, the father of evolution, he was interested in emotions.
Oh, absolutely.
Tell me about these principles.
Okay, so his first principle is serviceable habits, which basically means certain actions that were originally useful for survival, they became associated with a particular state of mind. And over generations, those actions evolved into the emotional expressions we recognize today.
Okay, I need an example.
Okay, imagine our ancestors squinting their eyes to block out the harsh sunlight. That squinting action, well, it might have also helped them focus when they were trying to remember something important.
Okay.
Over time, that physical act of squinting became associated with concentration or thoughtfulness.
I see.
And eventually, it kind of evolved into that furrowed brow expression that we see today.
So even though we don't need to squint indoors to think,
Right.
we still furrow our brows because that action is just so ingrained in our biology.
It's in there deep.
And then what's the second principle?
Okay, second principle is antithesis.
Mm-hmm.
It suggests that some expressions evolved because they were the opposite of a serviceable habit.
The opposite.
Like, think about shrugging your shoulders,
Oh, okay.
which usually conveys helplessness or uncertainty.
Yeah,
It's like the opposite of a confident, chest puffed out posture.
I get it. So it's like our bodies develop this whole language of opposites to express a wider range of emotions. What about the third principle?
Okay, so the third principle is expressive habits, and that's the idea that some expressions, well, they're just overflows of nervous energy, like foot tapping, or making sounds when you're anxious. They might not have a specific meaning, but they help release that tension.
So those nervous habits we all have, they might actually be leftovers from our evolutionary past.
Could be. It's fascinating, isn't it?
It is. But how did these expressions go from just, physical reactions to social signals? Way of communicating with each other.
Well, imagine you're one of our ancestors and you suddenly see someone with wide eyes and a panicked expression. You instantly know that something's wrong and you react accordingly.
Yeah, I'd be out of there.
Right. You either run or you prepare to fight alongside them. So over time, those expressions became more and more important for social communication.
That's a powerful example. Are you saying that facial expressions are like this universal language of emotion, like one that transcends spoken language?
There's some pretty fascinating research that suggests that's exactly what's happening.
Really?
Paul Ekman, who studied facial expressions across cultures, he found that basic emotions, happiness, sadness, anger, fear, disgust, they're recognized universally.
Even in isolated societies that haven't had contact with the outside world.
Even then.
Wow, that's incredible. So even if we don't speak the same language, we can still understand each other's basic emotions just by looking at their faces.
Exactly. It's like this built-in communication system connects us all.
But wait a minute, if these expressions are so universal, does that mean our culture and upbringing don't really play a role in how we experience and express emotions?
Now that's where things get even more interesting. While there's strong evidence for this biological basis for some core emotions, there's also a big debate about the role of culture. It's like that age-old nature versus nurture debate.
But with feelings.
Both feel.
So are our emotions hardwired or are they learned?
It's probably a bit of both.
Bit of both, yeah.
Some scientists, they believe in the basic emotions theory, which suggests that certain emotions are just innate,
Built in.
built in and universal. But others emphasize that, well, culture shapes our emotional landscapes in really profound ways.
So how do we reconcile those seemingly opposite views?
Well, there's this fascinating theory by Feldman Barrett that might help. She argues that emotions are conceptual events, meaning they're constructed by our minds based on bodily sensations, and how our culture teaches us to interpret them.
So our bodies might have these basic physiological responses, but how we understand and label those responses, that depends on what we've learned from our culture.
That's the idea. It's like our brains are constantly weaving these stories to make sense of these sensations. And those stories, well, they're influenced by our cultural backgrounds and personal experiences.
So our emotions are both hardwired and shaped by our experiences.
It's like nature and nurture working together, creating this complex tapestry of feelings.
Exactly, and that brings us to this idea of the emotional mind.
Oh yeah, the emotional
A
mind.
concept that really emphasizes how emotions are at the core of how we think
How we make decisions.
and how we interact with the world. It's not just something that happens after we think.
No.
Emotions are part of the fabric of our thought processes.
Woven right in.
Okay, tell me more about this emotional mind.
Okay. Think of it as a 3-layered model.
3 layers.
The first layer, it's the most basic, those primal instinctual drives, like fear, lust, and the need to seek out resources,
Keeping us alive.
keeping our bodies in balance, making sure we get what we need.
Those are the basic urges that drive us to act without really thinking too much about it.
Exactly.
What's the next layer?
Okay, so the second layer, this is where things get a little more personalized. This is where learned emotional responses come into play, based on our individual experiences.
So that's why what triggers a really strong emotional response in one person might not faze someone else at all.
Exactly. Like one person might have a phobia of spiders
Yeah.
because of a childhood experience,
Right.
while another person might not even flinch. So our personal histories really shape our emotional reactions.
Makes sense. So what about the third layer?
Ah, the third layer. This is where it gets really interesting. This is the layer that sets humans apart.
This is the human layer.
This is the human layer. It involves those more complex emotions that, well, they seem uniquely human, or at least have uniquely human components. We're talking about guilt, shame, pride, feelings that are deeply intertwined with our advanced cognitive abilities and our capacity for language.
So those are the emotions that require like a certain level of self-awareness and social understanding.
Right. They're not just about survival. They're about how we relate to ourselves and each other.
So they're products of our highly evolved brains and our complex social lives.
Exactly. And even though those emotions might be uniquely human, they're still built on that foundation. Those more basic instinctual emotions that we share with other mammals. It's like we've taken those basic building blocks of emotion and created something completely new.
So it's this amazing blend of those ancient primal emotions and these more complex evolved emotions
Working together.
all working together to create this incredible experience of being human. But I have a feeling this emotional legacy isn't all sunshine and roses, is it?
You're catching on. While our emotions helped us survive in the past, they can also be a source of conflict and challenges. especially in today's world. It's almost like a double-edged sword.
I see what you mean. The world has changed so much since our ancestors were roaming the savannah, but it's like our emotional responses haven't quite caught up. Can you give me some examples of how this plays out in modern life?
Sure, think about something as common as road rage. That intense anger and aggression that's triggered by something as, well, as trivial as someone cutting you off in traffic. That's a perfect example of our ancient fight-or-flight response misfiring.
Well, that's a good one. And I bet things like online bullying and the extreme polarization we're seeing in politics, those could also be partly explained by this mismatch, between our evolved emotions and our modern world.
Exactly. Our brains are still wired to react to threats in a way that might not be, well, appropriate or helpful in these new, more complex situations. That's why understanding the evolutionary roots of our emotions isn't just about looking back.
It's about figuring out how to navigate the present.
And create a better future.
So knowledge of our emotional past
It's like a superpower.
gives us the ability to understand and manage our emotions, and maybe even lead to greater well-being.
For ourselves.
And for society as a whole.
Exactly.
That's such an important point. And that brings us to the end of part 1 of our deep dive into the evolution of human emotions.
Stay tuned.
Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with part 2, where we'll delve even deeper into this fascinating world of emotions.
It's gonna be good. Welcome back to our exploration of the evolution of human emotions.
Before the break, we were talking about how even though our emotions evolved to help us survive, they can sometimes cause problems in our modern world.
It's true. To really understand those challenges, we need to kind of dig a little deeper into how emotions are triggered and expressed.
Okay, let's unravel that. We talked about the amygdala.
Yeah.
And its role in fear and other emotions. But where do our thoughts and perceptions fit into all of this?
Okay, so think of your brain as like a supercomputer with this program called the basic emotion response system.
Okay, a supercomputer. I like it.
Right. And your senses, they're like the keyboard. They're constantly feeding information into that program about the world around you.
So my senses are taking in information, but how does my brain actually make sense of all of that data?
Your brain processes that information, and it creates mental images, like snapshots, to figure out what's going on.
Snapshots, I'm with you.
And then your brain compares those snapshots to a mental library of emotionally relevant memories. You could call them schemas.
Okay, schemas. So if I see like a dog running toward me, my brain creates a mental picture of that dog and then compares it to my past experiences with dogs. And if I've been bitten before, that might trigger a fear response.
That's it. It's like your brain instantly pulls up the file labeled dog encounters and scans for any red flags.
Danger.
And if it finds a match, well, then it triggers this whole cascade of responses. Changes in your body, your facial expressions, your thoughts, and your subjective experience of the emotion itself.
Wow, so it's like our brains are constantly running these lightning fast calculations to determine how we should feel and react to everything that's happening around us.
It's really an amazing process.
It is.
And here's the really cool part. Those physical changes that happen when an emotion is triggered, well, they're not random.
They're not.
They're actually preparing us to act in a way that increases our chances of survival.
Okay, give me an example. I need an example.
Okay, let's stick with that dog running towards you.
Yeah.
If your brain decides that this situation is dangerous, your body goes into that fight or flight mode.
Oh, yeah. Classic.
Right, so your heart rate increases, your pupils dilate, your muscles tense up. All of these changes are basically prepping you to either confront the threat or run away from it.
So my whole body's getting ready to deal with this perceived danger.
Yeah.
But what about our facial expressions? How do those fit into all of this?
Remember those universal expressions?
Yeah.
Fear, happiness, sadness, disgust.
Right, the ones that Paul Ekman studied.
Exactly. Well, those facial expressions, they evolved as a way to communicate our emotions to other people.
Oh.
So when you're experiencing fear, for example, your facial expression changes to signal that fear to those around you.
So it's like a warning signal, like, hey, watch out, something's not right here.
Exactly. It's a way of saying, hey, be careful. And that shared understanding of emotions, especially through facial expressions, it would have been critical for the survival of our ancestors, especially those living in groups.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
It would have helped them stay safe as a group. But isn't it possible to control our facial expressions? I mean, we don't always want everyone to know how we're feeling, right?
Of course. We humans are, well, we are incredibly good at regulating our emotions and our expressions. But even when we're trying to hide our true feelings, there are always these subtle cues that leak through.
Oh, yeah. Those little giveaways that betray our poker faces.
Exactly. It just goes to show how complex and intertwined our emotional experiences with our physiology, our thoughts, our perceptions. You know, we might be able to control some aspects of our emotional responses, but there's always a part of us that's reacting instinctively.
It's like this intricate dance between our biology and our psychology,
That's a great way to put it.
playing out on the stage of our faces and bodies. But if we're so good at regulating our emotions, does that mean that our cultural background and personal experiences, like, do those not really matter?
Not at all. In fact, our ability to regulate emotions is heavily influenced by the cultures we grew up in and the experiences we have throughout our lives.
Okay, so how does that come into play in all of this?
Well, think about it. Different cultures have different rules and different expectations about, how we should express our emotions.
Right.
Some cultures encourage people to be very open about their emotions,
Oh.
while others value restraint.
Yeah.
Right? So, in some cultures, expressing anger might be seen as a sign of strength.
Or assertiveness.
While in other cultures, it might be considered rude or disrespectful. And those cultural norms, well, they shape how we learn to manage and express our emotions.
Makes sense.
Plus our personal experiences, especially those early interactions with our caregivers, they have a huge impact on our emotional patterns.
So it's like we're born with this basic set of emotional tools, but how we learn to use those tools really depends on the environment we grew up in.
It's a great way to think about it. And that brings us to a really fascinating question. If emotions are so deeply rooted in our biology,
Yeah.
why do people react so differently to the same situations?
Right. Why are some people more emotionally expressive than others?
Or better at controlling their emotions?
Yeah, we all know those people who wear their hearts on their sleeves.
Right.
And then there are those who just never seem to get ruffled.
Like, is it just personality? Or is there something more to it? Well, it's likely a combination of factors.
Like what?
Our genes, our temperament, our early childhood experiences, they all play a role. But there's also growing evidence that there might be different personality types when it comes to emotions.
Personality types. You mean like emotional categories that people fall into?
Some psychologists believe so. For example, there's this framework that suggests there are 3 main emotional styles: self-aware, engulfed, and accepting.
3 emotional styles. Okay, tell me more about this.
Okay, so self-aware individuals, they're very in tune with their emotions.
Yeah.
They can easily identify and express their feelings, and they're usually pretty good at understanding other people's emotions too.
Makes sense. So what about the other 2 types?
So you have engulfed individuals who tend to be overwhelmed by their emotions.
Yeah.
They might have trouble controlling their emotional responses and feel like their emotions are controlling them.
Rather than the other way around.
Exactly.
I can see how that would be challenging. And then you have the accepting types. They tend to experience their emotions in a more balanced way, without overreacting or feeling overwhelmed. They're often able to just, observe their emotions without judgment and let them pass without getting too caught up in them.
So it's like they can ride the waves of their emotions without getting swept away by the current.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
Now, it's important to remember that these emotional styles, they're not set in stone.
Right.
People can learn to become more self-aware.
Yeah.
They can learn to manage their emotions more effectively.
Uh-huh.
And they can even cultivate a more accepting approach to their inner world.
So it's like we have the power to shape our emotional landscapes,
We do.
even if we're starting from different points. But I'm curious, if these emotional styles are partly based on biology, are there evolutionary advantages to each type?
Now that is a fascinating question.
It is, right. And scientists they're still exploring it, but it makes sense that different emotional styles might have been beneficial in different situations throughout human history.
Like maybe being highly self-aware was beneficial for navigating those complex social hierarchies, while a more a more accepting approach might have been crucial for surviving in those unpredictable or dangerous environments.
Exactly. Different emotional styles might have helped our ancestors adapt to a wide range of challenges and ultimately contributed to the survival and success of their groups.
It's mind-blowing to think that something as seemingly internal
And personal
as our emotions could play such a big role in the grand scheme of evolution.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it underscores how important it is to understand the origins of our emotions, not just for scientific curiosity,
Right.
but also for our own well-being.
And the well-being of society as a whole.
Exactly.
This has been such an insightful deep dive so far. I'm so eager to explore even more about the complexities of emotions after the break.
We'll be back soon for the final part of our incredible journey.
Through the evolution of human emotions. Don't miss it.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We're in the final stretch of our exploration of how human emotions evolved.
It's been quite a journey.
Before the break, we were talking about those different emotional styles and how they might have, helped our ancestors survive in a world full of, danger and uncertainty.
Right. Just imagine those early humans living in small nomadic groups, constantly on the move, trying to find food and shelter.
It sounds pretty stressful. I can see how those different emotional styles might have been beneficial.
Exactly. So let's say you're one of our ancestors. You're living in that environment. If you're easily overwhelmed by every little stressor, you're not going to last very long.
Right. It would be exhausting to be in a constant state of fight or flight.
And that's where those accepting types, they might have had an advantage. They were less likely to overreact to every little perceived threat, which allowed them to stay calm and focused, even when things were really tough.
It's like they had this built-in resilience that helped them weather those storms, the storms of daily life.
Exactly. And that calmness, well, it would have been crucial for making good decisions, taking effective action, and ultimately increasing their chances of survival.
But what about those self-aware types? What advantage did they bring to the group?
Well, imagine you're living in this small, tightly knit group. Being in tune with other people's emotions would have been so important, for maintaining those social bonds.
Right. You need to be able to read those subtle cues.
Yeah.
Anticipate potential conflicts.
Yeah.
And just build strong relationships with the people you depend on for survival.
Exactly. So those self-aware individuals, they were probably the masters of social intelligence. They could sense when tensions were rising, smooth things over, strengthen the cohesion of the group.
So each emotional style had its own unique strengths that contributed to the well-being of, the group as a whole.
Precisely. It's like having all these different tools in a toolbox, each one valuable for a specific purpose.
That's a great analogy. And it makes me wonder, in our modern world, are we valuing certain emotional styles over others?
That's an interesting question. Our society often emphasizes, individuality, competition, emotional control.
Yeah.
So it's possible that those who are more and more expressive or easily overwhelmed by their emotions, they might face more challenges.
Sounds like we're told to suppress those messier emotions.
Right.
Even though they're a natural part of being human.
And that can be a real problem. We're not designed to just bottle up our emotions. They need a healthy outlet, a way to be expressed and processed.
It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. Eventually it's going to pop back up, maybe even knock you over in the process.
Exactly. And that's why understanding the evolution of emotions is, it's so important. It helps us to recognize that emotions aren't weaknesses.
Right.
They're integral parts of who we are.
They're a part of our evolutionary legacy, shaped by millions of years of survival.
And that legacy is, it's more important now than ever.
I agree.
As we face these complexities of modern life, climate change, political polarization, you name it, understanding and managing our emotions is, it's going to be key
to creating a better future.
Exactly.
It's like we need to tap into this collective emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
Of our species.
Precisely. We need to cultivate emotional awareness, empathy, compassion for ourselves and for others. And we need to create a world where all those emotional styles, they're valued and supported.
That's a beautiful vision. And I really do think that understanding where our emotions come from, it gives us a roadmap for getting there.
I agree. By recognizing that emotions are our allies, not our enemies, we can harness their power to create a more fulfilling world, a more compassionate world.
Well said. And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the evolution of human emotions. It's been an incredible journey.
It really has. We've explored those ancient origins of our emotions, the intricate workings of our brains.
And even debunked a few myths along the way.
And most importantly, we've gained a deeper appreciation for the complexity and the wonder. These amazing adaptations we call emotions.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you've learned something new and maybe even gained a few insights into your own emotional landscape.
Remember, your emotions are a part of your evolutionary heritage, a gift passed down through countless generations. Embrace them, explore them, and let them guide you toward a richer, more meaningful life.
Until next time, keep exploring those mysteries of the universe, both within and around you. Thanks for listening.